Hello internet users, you know what I'm a huge fan of? Horror games. There's something special about a genre that aims to make you afraid of everything within it, yet at the same time is enticing enough for you to willingly see the journey all the way through to the end. This is a subject that I've always been pretty passionate about, but for some reason haven't really discussed too much on this channel. And today, while exploring something new, we're still going to be returning to some familiar topics: Pokemon and fan games. With a series as popular as Pokemon, there have been many fan games springing up over the years, the most well-known ones coming in the forms of ROM hacks of the official games. Every once in a while, though, we see a Pokemon fan game that does things a little differently, trying to create an original experience that doesn't stem from the series staple of collecting and battling monsters. And the star of today's video is one of such games, a Pokemon fan game that offers something you'd never see in an official one: a survival horror experience. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pokemon Nightmare Invasion. The game begins with a very effective hook. You play as Jack, a detective sent in to investigate the mysterious case of Azure City. No one knows why, but all of its residents have suddenly disappeared, and to make matters worse, every police officer who went there to find an explanation has never returned. So instead of, calling in the army or something to deal with what is clearly a huge concern to public safety, let's just send in one guy, he'll figure it out. Well, if it worked in Resident Evil 4, I'm sure it'll turn out fine here. Upon arriving in the city, Jack finds it to be the ghost town that was promised, completely devoid of life and with little signs that tell why. From here on, the gameplay consists of exploring Azure City, finding key items, solving puzzles, and reading notes to try and piece together just what it was that happened in this town. I have to say, this game does a really good job of building atmosphere in the beginning. It takes full advantage of its setting, starting you out with little information and lots of questions, and then throws you into a big area to hunt for answers. And while the entire place may seem empty, you just know that there is something dangerous out there, and it's only going to be a matter of time until you encounter whatever it is. You definitely feel uneasy when you're taking a look inside of the buildings throughout the city. I especially like how it rains during the game's opening portion, with Jack even having an umbrella while he's walking around outdoors. It's the little things like that that really make me appreciate the thought and effort that went into this. All around, I'd call this a fantastic start to a horror game. The graphics, as you've no doubt noticed, are either directly taken or are edited sprites from the Pokemon games on the Game Boy. All of them being in black and white is also a very nice touch. In some places, there is even this lighting effect that just looks really great. Just look at how the light spills into the room from the door here. This is old school Pokemon visuals, and it honestly boggles my mind how naturally it fits in. And the music, well, unfortunately, a lot of it is just meaties of classic Pokemon tracks, but it does surprisingly work well for the most part. I actually really like the rendition of Lavender Town that plays while you're wandering around outside. Something that I need to bring up though is the text font that this game uses. This game was made in RPG Maker 2003. And from what I understand, this is the default font for the program when beginning a new project. Some of you may even remember this font from one of the bad Sonic fan games I talked about a while back. There are a lot of characters that just blob together, and it can be frustrating to read at times. Pretty unfortunate. I've since been told that there is a way to patch the font into something else, so if you want to try this game for yourself, I'd recommend looking into that. But what you see here is just how the game was released. Now, so far, I've mainly just praised everything that this game has done. Unfortunately, though, that's all about to change. While the game certainly does have a very strong beginning, after you finish the first section of the city, this is where everything starts to go downhill. The first thing that needs to be addressed is the enemies in combat. While in one of the buildings, Jack stumbles upon some vicious Growlithe. After running to a dead end, it is here that you get your gun. And well, fighting enemies is just plain awkward. By holding down a button, you can continuously shoot in the direction you are facing. You also have the ability to back up and move from side to side while you're firing. It's an idea that on paper sounds pretty good. But where it all falls apart is with the enemy's AI. For the most part, their movements are just random with an occasional few steps of moving towards you. As a result of this, most encounters don't involve any strategy and are more about just waiting for them to walk into your line of fire. Regular enemies aren't difficult to deal with, as there are healing items and you can also fully heal by resting at pretty much any bed you come across. But because of their movements, it quickly turns combat into a chore. It also doesn't help that whenever you enter into an area with enemies, you're forced to kill all of them before you can exit. In my opinion, it's these combat portions that deal a pretty big blow to the game as a whole. When playing a horror game, you don't have to feel afraid every time you come across an enemy to fully enjoy it. But when the things that are supposed to scare me are instead making me roll my eyes, then there's definitely a problem. And unfortunately, after you get the gun and move on to the next part of the city, fighting enemies is going to become a very common occurrence. And sure, you might find it a little fun at first, but believe me, it gets old real fast. Luckily, ammo is infinite and you don't have to reload, otherwise this game would probably just be impossible. After exploring more of the houses in the city, eventually Jack comes across an Alakazam. Next thing he knows, he's been captured and is stuck inside some kind of unspecified science machine. Upon breaking out, Jack tries to find a way out of wherever he's been taken to. Okay. Before Jack can even process what the heck he just saw, another one of the Alakazams appear and punches him out of the building, Dragon Ball Z style. Now, I get that they were probably upset that I showed up to their little party uninvited, but I really don't think that warranted a 10-story fall out of a building. While captured though, an important item that you pick up in that building is HM4, Strength. Throughout the city, there are familiar obstacles that keep you from entering some places: small trees, boulders, and large bodies of water. While in the actual Pokemon games, the HMs are used to teach Pokemon how to deal with these roadblocks, in this game, they're apparently some kind of serum that gives Jack the power to handle it himself. Strength gives you the strength to move boulders, Surf allows you to swim, and Cut lets you chop down trees with your bare hands. Still don't know why I can't just walk around them though. This is something that I really like as a means of progression in the game. It's a little twist on something familiar. It's a nice change of pace from the number input passwords that, in my opinion, this game relies on way too much. By the way, since it isn't made very clear at the beginning, I should probably stop and mention something. You see, this game doesn't actually take place in the world of Pokemon. There are no trainers, gyms, or colorful creatures standing at every street corner. No, all of the Pokemon you see in the city are monsters that, judging from Jack's reaction to them, are things that are not supposed to exist. This is just a bland, ordinary world where all of the enemies just happen to look like and are named after recognizable Pokemon. It's kind of interesting to see a fan game take this route. Next, let's talk a bit about the bosses of Nightmare Invasion. I mentioned earlier that regular enemies all pretty much just move about randomly. However, when you're dealing with a boss, the game only manages to change things up just a little bit. Aside from the obvious factors of having more health and just generally being big, every boss has a minor gimmick to it. For instance, Nidoking will occasionally charge you at high speed, and other bosses like Kabutops require you to make use of the sidestepping while you shoot. Some of them, though, can just be plain cheap. Take this fight, for example. Machamp here throws these energy waves with its fists. But for the life of me, I can't figure out how to exactly tell which side it's going to send its attack on. And even when I think I do, you move so slow while shooting and the arena is so small, you're pretty much guaranteed to take damage here. And then I realized that if you stand directly in front of him, none of its attacks can hurt you and you're free to shoot at it until it's dead. I have no idea how the developer missed that, but I am not complaining. However, by far, the worst boss fight in the entire game is against this guy right here. When Jack eventually makes his way back into the building he was tossed out of, he meets this weird professor. Now, the first thing you may have noticed here is that this room is one big reference to Professor Oak's lab from the original Pokemon games. Now, while I do appreciate little nods like that, the problem here is that you have to do an incredibly annoying boss fight in this room. This man will move about randomly and after taking a few hits from your gun, will teleport to somewhere else in the room. This is incredibly obnoxious. Everything about this fight is just luck. If he warps near you, it'll sometimes just be impossible to avoid taking damage. While some other bosses clearly had an arena made specifically for their fight, here you have to deal with all of this in a small room. This may come as a shock to many of you, but as it turns out, the map of Professor Oak's laboratory was not designed for a gunfight against a teleporting guy. What makes this fight even worse is that you have to go through a few minutes of dialogue before the fight even begins, so if you lose, you have to sit through the whole scene again just to give it another try. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that he can just randomly heal himself during the fight? Because that's really fair. Another thing that really ticked me off while I was playing through this game was this room. You're required to move the boulders around this little maze to get through. To the side here, there is a bed. and if you try to get to it, you immediately realize that it's impossible to reach and it's just a giant tease to the people who really need a full heal at that moment. However, this was not what made me upset. I realized that one of the tiles was actually passable, and that you can reach the bed from the back. I thought I had just figured out a secret, but upon examining it, I got a message that says, "You shouldn't be here," and the game proceeds to freeze, forcing me to go back to my last save. My guess is that this was meant to be a way to punish cheaters. That's all well and good, but if you're going to do that, you should probably make sure that the people who are playing fairly aren't able to trigger it by accident. Alright, now from here on, I want to talk about some of the endgame stuff. I'm not going to go super in-depth when talking about the plot, but if you'd like to avoid seeing any visual spoilers, skip ahead to the time you see on screen. Annotations are gone now. Thanks, YouTube! So eventually Jack encounters a bunch of ghosts and then ends up with superpowers after his hair changes color. Don't worry, that doesn't make any more sense in context, I promise. Afterward, Jack discovers a secret underground lab, which he goes down into. This is the last area of the game and is definitely one of my least favorite. By this point, the developer decided that they needed to do something to increase the difficulty of the enemies. So what they ended up doing, in addition to making them take a bit longer to kill, was to have the lights flicker on and off during combat portions. This is a horribly misguided attempt to provide more of a challenge to the player. And since this is near the end of the game, the repetitiveness of the combat will already have you pretty annoyed. But by far, the last nail in the coffin is the final boss. During the last phase of the fight, the screen will begin to shake, and will not stop until you land the final hit. This is horrendous. Just looking at it is probably making some of you sick. Imagine having to play it. Quite honestly, if this fight wasn't the last one in the game, I don't think I would have even bothered continuing. Overall, Pokemon Nightmare Invasion is a game that I have very mixed thoughts about. It most certainly has a lot of flaws, but the whole way through, I could see the thought and effort that went into every little thing. Even if it didn't always work, I definitely can't call it lazy. The layout and location variety of the city is fantastic. Even though it uses assets from the original Pokemon games, Azure City stands out as more of a real city than any of the ones you'd see in an official game. However, there are numerous instances of the game just being too ambitious for its own good. For example, in one of the larger buildings, there is a flickering effect on screen. This is meant to show that the electricity in the building is not functioning properly, causing the lighting to fade in and out. But as a result of this, while exploring this area, you're going to be constantly annoyed as the game does this every couple of seconds. I think this was supposed to be for immersion, but I think the game would have been much better off without it. Another area that I think could have been improved is with the game's puzzles. I mentioned how I liked having the HMs as key items that let you reach new places, but when it comes to solving actual puzzles, this game doesn't have anything outstanding. What I remember most after playing through is that I was inputting number passwords most of the time. A little more variety would have worked wonders here. And of course, I've already covered those pesky bosses. I avoided going into a lot of detail about the game's plot past the beginning because this game is something that I think more people should be aware of and check out. The story is nothing revolutionary, but it was still an interesting one that kept me curious until the end. Try it for yourself and go for the multiple endings. The game is a fairly decent length that you'll get more than a couple hours out of. In conclusion, let me just say this. Pokemon Nightmare Invasion is a game that has a lot going for it, but also has a fair share of things working against it as well. It's the little things that help hold it together, but are also what causes it to slip up every now and then. If you're a fan of both Pokemon and/or survival horror games such as Silent Hill or Resident Evil, then this game is an absolute must-play. As a huge fan of these things myself, I still really enjoyed this game all the way through, despite many of the issues I have with it. Even if it doesn't always accomplish what it's trying to do, I still greatly appreciate its efforts. And hey, it's a free game made by one guy. With that in mind, it still went far beyond expectation. I hope the developer continues to make games, because I definitely would want to see more from them. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. Hope you all enjoyed. It was a little different. I wasn't really trying super hard to be funny with this one. This was more so of a way for me to organize my thoughts after playing this game. If you want to see a full playthrough of this game, you can check out the one on my Let's Play channel. I'll put on the top there. Thanks again, have a good one. Bye-bye.